programadores na Restart, para além de um antigo aluno que também, ele próprio, é um developer e que está a começar a trabalhar e a dar os primeiros passos. Reforço mais uma vez, vocês que são, e vejo aqui tanta gente jovem, aproveitem para comunicar com esses mesmos developers portugueses, para conhecer os seus jogos, para conhecer o mercado, para entrarem também um bocadinho dentro da indústria e para darem-se a conhecer a nível de ideias ou até mesmo de contactos que possam estabelecer para, uma vez que estamos numa feira de videojogos, no futuro sejam vocês a virem aqui, por exemplo, a este palco do Auditório Salão de Jogos, apresentar os vossos trabalhos, apresentar aquilo que também andam a fazer. Ao longo de todo o dia vamos ter várias interações. A próxima será com o Samuel Kahn, que nos vai aqui falar um bocadinho sobre toda a sua história, de como trabalhou na indústria, de como trabalha na indústria, em várias frontes e também em várias variantes. Vai-nos falar um bocadinho também do seu trabalho com a Crytek Engine, como vocês sabem, é um dos grandes motores de jogo de vários jogos que podem jogar ainda hoje, como é o caso do Test Drive Unlimited ou é o caso do futuro Tom Clancy's The Division. Para além disso, terão também a oportunidade neste auditório e salão de jogos, ao longo do dia, de não só ver os melhores vídeos e trailers e alguns conteúdos exclusivos durante aquilo que nós chamamos a hora do almoço entre a 1 e as 2 da tarde. Depois terão também mais algumas ações, nomeadamente a oportunidade de conhecer mais alguns developers nacionais, numa ação também feita em Made in Portugal, os developers portugueses a apresentar os seus próprios videojogos. Teremos também numa ação em relação à apresentação do futuro livro de Ivan Barroso, historiador de videojogos, que nos vai falar do seu próximo livro e apresentá-lo aqui em primeira mão. E teremos lá mais para o final da tarde, a partir das 5 da tarde e até provavelmente às 7, teremos um youtuber, que não vamos desvendar quem é, a demonstrar em primeira mão o Need for Speed, que não só está ali em demonstração na PlayStation, mas nós vamos fazer aqui o comentário a todas as novidades em relação ao jogo da Electronic Arts, que saiu precisamente hoje e que já podem testar não só aqui na Lisboa Games Week, como terão a presença de um youtuber que vocês conhecem, é claro, para demonstrar esse mesmo jogo e termos um bocadinho de conversa, para além de até interação, porque é isso que queremos criar neste auditório. É que toda a gente que esteja aqui presente possa fazer perguntas aos seus youtubers preferidos, mas também aos game developers nacionais, às pessoas que trabalham e que também fazem desenvolver esta mesma indústria de videojogos. Eu não vos vou amassar muito mais, até porque as questões técnicas estão praticamente todas tratadas a nível da próxima apresentação do Samuel Kahn. Portanto, aquilo que faremos é, claro, é dar conta dessa mesma apresentação e dizer também que foi um grande esforço por parte da organização e por parte da equipa do Salão de Jogos, do site Videojogos, em salãodejogos.net, trazer o Samuel, que foi desde logo uma pessoa que abertamente nos disse que queria vir, que gostava de vir e gostava de partilhar toda a sua experiência convosco. Eu sei que não é muito usual que tal aconteça, apenas muitas vezes para círculos fechados, mas o Samuel deu-nos então esta oportunidade de dar conta de todo o seu trabalho e de preparar uma apresentação exclusiva para vocês aqui no nosso auditório. Portanto, dentro de minutos, e peço-vos que tenham um pouco mais de paciência para que essa mesma ação aconteça com o nosso grande Samuel Kahn, só breves momentos para termos a apresentação pronta e para terem também aqui no nosso palco o Samuel Kahn. Obrigado.
That's a problem. You have two different computers on it. There are two different computers showing. You see the bottom one and there are two computers there.
This might mean good luck.
Yeah, okay. That's my presentation, but you know.
Tem a resolução do PC. Tem a resolução do ar.
So Pedro, should I try to make it faster? Or
No problem. Because the next one is just a slot with video and trailers from the other stuff. Take your time, no problem.
Okay.
We have everything working.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. It certainly looks like this.
I put the presentation mode.
Right.
So you can
I will see presenter view.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
you'll
that's
see
good.
your notes.
Okay, that's perfect. We're getting there. Oh, next year, if we do this again, we set it up before.
Yeah.
And we have a clicker. Clicker is cool, it's important.
Yeah.
Then you can move around. Sorry, what is this? What game is that from?
It's pheromones.
Okay. Okay. Hello. Do you hear me? Does it sound good? Yeah. Okay. Hi. Welcome to my presentation. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. Right. So first of all, I wanted to thank the Lisboa Games Week to have invited me here and to set up all of this machine. And I wanted to ask you first if I can get this sound running. Are there any students that are trying to get into the games industry here? Just to make sure. A few of them. 3 guys. Okay, so this presentation is basically for you 3 guys. And I have, I think, a very important question to ask you. There's a 4th guy over there. You want more sound? You want more sound? Guys? Okay. All right, let's make this. All right. I don't know. Can you hear me over there? Okay, okay. So I wanted to ask you a question if you're a student. And that question is, do you want to make games? And I think it's a very important question to ask yourself because you tend to ask yourself quite a few times this question throughout your career.
It's a better one.
Yeah? Hello? Okay, that's better. Although a little bit less practical. Okay, so do you want to make games? And I think if you're a student today, the answer is probably yes. And so I thought maybe you would be interested in hearing the story of somebody who wants to make games and who's asked himself that question quite a few times. So my name is Samuel Kahn. I currently work at Crytek in Germany. I'm lead programmer on the CryEngine. I'm not the only lead programmer on the CryEngine. We're a few guys doing that. And I wanted to give you a look at perhaps some sides of the games industry that we talk about less often, which are game engines development and also the AAA games industry. So, like many of you, I had pretty humble beginnings. This is me with my first video game console. I had a Game Boy. And this was pretty late in my life. I already was really passionate about games, but my parents never really let me own one, so that was a big victory to me. And at the time, I never really thought I would be making games. I thought I would be either a chef or a maestro, so nothing like that. Although one thing that I kept is that I really enjoyed giving orders to people. That's 2 jobs that sort of do that as well. But anyway, I didn't follow the traditional path to do games. I just followed what I liked in school, and eventually I ended up in a like scientific university, so to say, called the National Institute of Applied Sciences in France. And there I got a master's degree in software engineering. This was not really applied to games at all. We didn't do any C++. So for those of you who know how games are made, this is more or less the programming language that we use most of the time. And we didn't do any game projects, so I wasn't really prepared to do any of this. But I think they taught me some different things. They taught me about programming, and they taught me that programming is really the art of being adaptable. And if you really understand the concepts, and it's not really about the language, you can really do whatever you want if you understand what you're doing with programming. And I think this is always something important to keep in mind. So as long as you never stop learning, you can really do what you want. And in the city where I studied, most of the things you can do after this school was working for the aerospace industry. So this is where Airbus has their headquarters. And I didn't really feel like that at the time, so I took a decision. I wanted to have more fun in my life than just working on planes. I don't know. And I decided I wanted to make games. So I was going to follow my passion a bit. And for this, I had to, do a bit of effort. I had to learn C++ all by myself. And I knew my sort of academic background wasn't good enough to get a job. I needed to get some experience, and so I started sending resumes to try to get some internships. And I probably sent around 100, 150 resumes at the time and got only one answer in a small city north of Sweden called Umeå. This is close to the polar circle, so you get almost full daylight in the summer and full night in the winter. And there I was working in a really small company called Resolution Interactive. I worked there for 3 months, and I learned a bit, but mostly this was a way for me to get a first experience and to get a first experience in C++. So I was working on small games for iPhone and 3DS. And that was nice, but mostly this helped me get into a second, this time bigger opportunity in Lyon in France. And this time I was working for Eden Games. So maybe you've heard of this studio. It was part of Atari at the time. And I did my final internship there. And the game they were doing was Test Drive Unlimited 2. So that was already a much bigger opportunity than mobile games and 3DS games. And I was doing some gameplay programming on their DLC. I don't have a video to show you about this, sadly. But anyway, I graduated after that, but the studio was experiencing some difficulties, and I didn't get any job offer. So this is another reality of the games industry, that it's not always easy for studios, and it's not always easy for individuals to have job safety. And at the time, I was done with school, I was done with my internships, and I really needed a job badly. So I started sending hundreds and hundreds of resumes again, mostly in different countries actually. But eventually I got called in Paris, and this was a really great opportunity for me because I was called at the Ubisoft studio there. And what I did is that I tried to show that I had done something with my few experiences. Even though I didn't have much to show for, I really showed some confidence, and I showed that I could be a great asset to them, and they believed in me, and they gave me my first real professional experience. So for all of you studying out there, keep trying. It can seem a bit hard because you send a lot of resumes, you send a lot of things around, and you don't get answers, but you can make it if you persevere and if you're confident. Right, and the job that they gave me was working on game engines, and this is also something I didn't really choose that, but incidentally, this was my first job as a game engine programmer, and I've been doing that ever since. So I think it's interesting to see how you specialize sort of against your will. And at the time I was working on Ghost Recon Future Soldier, so that was also a really interesting title, multi-platform, all the complexity that you could get at the time in a title. So I wanted to show you something about this game. This is from a Let's Play video from YouTube. And it's pretty much my favorite scene in the game. Does this have sound? Do you have sounds for the PC?
Holding for your shot. On your word. Marking target 3. Holding for your shot. Standing by. On your shot. Fire. Reloading.
Julle ouens moet maar eerder bly by rugby.
Dropped. Camo activated. Ready to fire. 2 targets marked. That's 4. On you. Oh, fire! That one.
All right, so that was actually an achievement in the game to kill all of those four football players at the same time without triggering the alert. And I will get back to that in a minute. So my involvement with this game was, I was working on the game engine, but more specifically I was working on the cinematics and cinematic pipeline. So you know, if you're not familiar with game engines, that is what you traditionally would use to make cutscenes. So cutscenes would be something where the player doesn't really have any input, you know, something happens and you just watch it. But when you want to make something that complicated, such as the football scene that you saw here, it actually turns out that the easiest way to make this is to use the cutscene editor and the cutscene pipeline. But you create something much more complicated, which I call scripted in-game events. And now you have this sort of cutscene that's playing with the football guys, but you can, you know, trigger the alert, you can kill them, you can do a lot of things, and they need to be able to exit their cutscene stage and resume gameplay and do this in sort of a graceful way. And this is extremely difficult to do. And probably very early on, this taught me the lesson that, you know, even if you make a hammer to hammer nails, eventually somebody's going to try to hammer screws with it, even though it wasn't designed for that. So when you make game engines, this is something you need to know, that somebody's always going to try to use what you're doing in the wrong way. Another interesting thing with this is that you get to interact with everybody because, you know, cutscenes need to impact every single aspect of the game, or use every aspect of the game. Ultimately, this was a lot of experience for me, and it was even more because I was part of a team that was mostly senior. So this was for me huge opportunity. I was the only junior there, and these guys had been there since pretty much the dawn of games development. They had done, you know, Super Nintendo games and things like this, and they were doing games since we were doing games in garages. So they taught me a lot. They taught me about game technology, and, you know, I started understanding all the different pieces that make it possible to make a game. And also they taught me about you know, the games industry in general, in the sense that there are a lot of processes, there are a lot of rules as how we make games, and sort of all the games follow these things. A lot of you know, politics and decisions and different stages of your project, especially in these AAA studios. And there I learned a lot, and I felt that even after a few years, you know, I knew pretty much everything that had to be known. Obviously that was not true, but, you know. Anyway, at the end of this, my contract didn't get renewed again, so I was again out of job. You know, welcome to the games industry. And I had to ask this question again to myself: do I want to make games? And I wasn't really sure at the time. Again, you know, you have the opportunity to try to find something maybe more stable, but I still said yes. I wanted to make games, but I wanted to do other things. I think that you don't, you know, live to work, you work to live, and you want to do other things for yourself. I wanted to travel, and if I wanted to make games, I wanted to make games that I enjoyed. And that was something that, you know, I started to be more picky about what I wanted to do. Anyway, at the time I just had lost my job, so I just went on unemployment. So this is my slide about unemployment in France. You know, try it. It's quite interesting. And yeah, I spent some time unemployed and trying to figure out what I was going to do after that. And eventually, I got in touch with another studio in Sweden, again. So this is Malmö. It's quite a big city in Sweden. And there's a studio called Ubisoft Massive. Maybe you've heard of it. And the way I got this was that I had stayed in touch with Ubisoft. I told them I still wanted to work with them, but just, you know, in another setting, in another country. And this was perfect for me. I wanted to work abroad, and I knew about Sweden because I had done an internship there, and I knew Sweden was going to be a fun time. And they were making an unannounced MMO game at the time, and I was really interested in that. I was playing, primarily I was playing Age of Conan and EVE Online, which I guess are two MMO games. I was really into this. And the game that they were doing was something I could really get into. So that was The Division. And I'm sure you guys have heard of this. I also wanted to show you something about The Division. This is from the E3 2013 trailer, which I worked on.
Coming out.
Got one.
2 on the left, 1 on the right. Okay, 2 more on the right.
Oh, yeah, see him. Ooh, they threw a Molotov. Look out.
Good call, thank you.
Shot.
Nice shot.
Yep.
Okay, on the right, there he is.
Yeah, I got it.
Easy, okay. Oh, there goes the turret.
Oh. Heal you guys up.
Nice, thank you.
Hey guys, what's up?
Hey.
Oh, what's up, Chris? Welcome to the battle, dude.
Alright, group buff coming your way.
Good, thanks.
Nice.
Hold on, ooh, I'm getting shot at now.
Yeah, go around the back.
Alright, moving. Oh shit, hold on, I think we got one more.
Watch out, on the left,
Yep. Oh, you see the guy on the roof?
Yeah, oh, there he is, okay.
He's the one doing it.
Wow,
Oh, he's supposed to be an elite, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll move to mark him now.
Shit.
I can't see him. I cannot get a shot.
Chris, can you mark him or something?
Hold on, I think I got him.
Yeah, got him.
Nice.
Okay, that's done. Let's check out the inside.
Alright, I need to hop out. I'll see you guys later though.
See you later.
Hey, dude.
You guys coming?
Yeah, right behind you.
Yeah. All right. So that was still pretty impressive 2 years later. Right. So, as you know, or as you may know, the game has not yet been released, so I can't really get into details about this game production, and I can't really answer any questions about it. I can, however, talk about what I did myself. Again, I was offered a game engine position. So I didn't get any choice throughout this whole thing. I got a game engine position, and then the second offer was also a game engine position. But it turns out that I actually quite like this. And very early on, I noticed that these two games are very similar. If you look at them, they're both first of all, they're actually both Tom Clancy games. They're both realistic games. They're both they have cover mechanics. They have shooter mechanics. They have a lot of similar things. And I started noticing that many of the systems that we had made for Ghost Recon weren't quite in place yet for the Division. So I decided I wanted to use my experience and show that I can do something better here. And what I did is that I took initiative. I went to the bosses and I said, hey, how about this system? How about this solution? How about this thing that we don't really have? And you got to trust me. You're going to have this problem in the future. And I didn't really expect their reaction. What I expected was, we don't really have time. Like just do what you're told. But that's not what happened. What happened is that they said, yeah, okay, that's great. That's really good ideas. But you're gonna have to fix that yourself, though. So suddenly I found myself with a lot of work and a lot of responsibility. And at the same time, I find myself having my fingers in every different system of the game engine and in contact with many different people. And this led to me being promoted to lead programmer quite fast for industry standards. And when you're lead programmer on such a big game engine, you start taking a step back and asking yourself some more questions. And I think the most important one was, what is a game engine? What am I trying to do here? What's my job? And for me, I believe that a game engine is sort of like a factory. It's like a production line where you try to make a solution to make games the most efficient way, and games in a way that will really empower people like artists to make the best game. And so the question you got to answer is, what is the best way to make games? And of course, there's not really a good answer to this question. I'm sorry if you were expecting it. But because the answer to this question changes for every game and changes all the time. But the reality is that you can't really find the best way to make games, because you're part of a game project. You're not really trying to make the best game engine ever. You're trying to make this game. And so you need to find a balance, basically. You need to find a balance between the perfect solution that you're trying to make and between this relatively short-term deadline of shipping this game. If I compare game engine, if I program something in the game engine, this code maybe will be there in like 10 to 15 years, somebody else will be working with this. If I work on the game, it's relatively short. It's a few years, and then this game goes off in the wild. So it's really, really difficult to try to make the best solution if you're part of a game. And yeah, this was all the sort of things I started thinking about while working there. But at the same time, I was pretty happy. I had made it. I had a stable job, finally, in the games industry. I had a good position. I was on a good project. I was having quite good times in Sweden, to be honest. And this time for me was also a big time of inspiration. I started thinking of the games industry in a larger scope and, tried to get interested in what was really happening around me. And, of course, you're inspired by people that you work with, but it's not the only thing. You got to see larger than your project, larger than your studio. There is a greater community of people that make games. And, I wanted to sort of like get in touch with them and see what they thought. And I started going to conferences more. In Malmö, in that city I was working in, we have the chance to host the Nordic Game Conference every year. I don't know if you're familiar with this one. It's not the most popular developers conference, but it's very interesting. It's very focused on independent developers because Scandinavia is a place that hosts a lot of independent developers, and doing AAA there is you're sort of the exception. There are a few studios, but not so many. So basically, go to conferences. That's something I can't stress enough. I mean, I'm sure you know because you're here, but go to conferences nonetheless. Why? Because it's fun. It's really fun. And yes, there are very, very good parties. This is a picture of a party. And this is an opportunity to make real connections. If you go to a conference and if you're a student or a developer, don't just hand your business cards. Try to care about the people, make sure they care about you, and this will pay off in the long run. I mean, the industry is a very, very small world. And I could give an example. The reason why I'm here today is because of a friend that I worked with who eventually got me in touch with the Lisboa Games Week. So, again, make sure that you make real connections. Don't just go and try to sell yourself. And usually at games industry conferences, there are talks, and I would recommend that, maybe you skip the technical talks a bit. I know it's a strange advice because myself, I'm a technical person, but when I go there, I barely go to the technical talks. You can watch them later. You can watch them online if you really need them, if the subject is interesting. But I would say don't miss the inspirational ones. There's always a few talks that will make you progress, make you think, make you reflect upon yourself. And I think for me that's always the most important part of these conferences. So go there and get inspired. I think that's really what I wanted to say. And for me, the Nordic game was really a big source of inspiration. Suddenly, I wanted to make something even better than what I was doing at work. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make something that would push the games medium and the games industry to its boundaries. And this also inspired me to work on a personal project that I never really found the courage to do before that. But at the same time, as I was inspired, I was also very disappointed. And the reason for that is that you start talking to many different people and you realize that there are certain problems that appear everywhere. There are certain patterns that you can't really avoid. And even if you wanted to make your game, it turns out that it's a very difficult thing if you have an idea that you want to push to the end. And so, I could tell this story about this one time where I met a guy that had a really good idea, or at least he thought he had a really good idea. And I tried to explain to him why you can't really make this idea. And again, let's say you have a really good idea and you probably want to make a high quality game because that's what you want to do. You want to have a big impact. And suddenly you find yourself needing a large amount of resources, a big budget. And this is where problems begin. So there is this sort of scope between independent and AAA games that you can land into. But already you want to make a high quality game, so you're going to need a high budget. If you would go for an independent game, well, you would have to sacrifice something because you don't have the money to make it. On the other hand, if you make an independent game, you can really do whatever you want because there's nobody there to tell you what to do. If you want to make a game with a high budget, well, somebody will give you constraints. There is a high budget, and this is a big risk, so we need to make the money back. And in turn, this creates a lot of constraints and features that you need to have. And if you look at the AAA games today, you will recognize that a lot of them follow the same patterns for this very reason. Another part is that if you make an independent game, you're going to take all the risk. So if you fail, well, that could be either very disappointing or very financially problematic. If you make a AAA game, somebody else will take the fall, and you could even be a successful studio, even if your AAA game fails, because the publisher, is the one that takes the biggest fall there. So you could still have a successful studio even with failing games. And you start realizing that none of these extreme ends really fit what you want. You still want to make a really good idea, you want to make a really nice game with it, and none of these fit the bill. If you talk to independent guys, they want to be AAA guys, they want to have the money, and if you talk to AAA guys, they want to be independent because they want to have the creative freedom, and nobody's really happy with what they have. And what you want to do is be in the middle, but this middle doesn't really exist today. There aren't so many games that have medium budget and medium quality. That's in fact not really, there's not really a market for this, and this is a bit sad for me. I started being really disappointed with that. And at the same time, all of these things were spinning around in me, and I was starting to be disappointed with myself. Why? Because I had followed my passion, and by following my passion, I had gotten a bit emotionally invested in my work. I really cared about what I was doing. And, after a while, this became perfectionism. I just wanted it to be perfect. I couldn't have it any other way than the perfect way. And this eventually became some sort of obsession. I was going to do everything in my power, and nobody was going to stop me until I had it perfect. And don't do that, by the way. But at the same time, I was on a very stressful project. The Division is quite a big game. And all of these things combined, and me really realizing that I couldn't do what I really wanted to do, I became quite frustrated. And letting that brew for a little while, this becomes burnout. So that's when you really think that there's no way that you can carry on like this. You just painted yourself in a corner, and you have to rethink your life choices for a while. And what I really wanted to tell you is that making games is hard. Making games is very hard, and I'm not the only one to say it. Sure, it's probably harder if you're independent, but it's also hard for everybody in the industry just because you follow your passion, you put your emotions forward, and you will get hurt. So be ready for that. I don't think I know anybody in the industry that hasn't gotten hurt at one point or another. And burnout is pretty common. I'm not the only one. And there will be many more after me. So, you end up asking yourself, was it worth it? Was the passion worth it? Why did I do this? And more importantly, what do I do next? Do I still want to make games? And it took me a while to answer this question, and I think I really started thinking about what games had brought to me and why I started doing this in the first place. This is me as a kid again. I like these pictures. And I was playing Legos for a long time. This is not a video game, but still a game. And probably one of the major reasons why I eventually became an engineer was games, because Legos are all about building things and breaking things down. And later on in my life, games had also helped me socialize a lot. I played online games, and I went to LAN parties, and I met a lot of people like this. Some of the friends I met like this, I went on to live with for a few years, and some of the communities I built really expanded my vision. So games had helped me socialize. Games had helped me, become the person I am today. And even more recently, I had played EVE Online. If you haven't played that or heard about it, look it up. And this was even more of a thing for me because EVE Online is an opportunity to participate in a social experiment. And the best way I could describe this is what would happen in a world of extreme deregulated capitalism with no consequences. And whatever. It's just something to think about when you play this game. And you make very real reflections upon the real world. And maybe for the first time in the history of gaming, one game had been able to create a real living world that exists if only you know about it. And my point was that, games really had permeated to many of the aspects of my personality. Video games had influenced me, and I wanted to make games that influence people. We often think of games as just entertainment, but I think they can be a lot more. Games can carry a message. Games can connect people together. Games can change the player. You can be a different person after you play a game. And of course, games don't have to be that. Games can be all of this, and games can be different things. But for me, this is really the aspect that captivated me. I also think that, if you have a message, you also have a responsibility to have a good message. And we often talk about military games as, some bad examples of video games' influence on people. And I wanted to give a counter-example to that. In 1998, Metal Gear Solid is pretty much the antithesis of war games. Metal Gear Solid was a game where you're encouraged not to kill. Metal Gear Solid is a game where the soldier always asks questions about his mission, questions the nature of war, questions the nature of his orders, questions himself. And, it's a lot of philosophical reflections, and even if it's mixed with, strange things and supernatural events and conspiracy theories, it's still a game that makes you reflect a lot. And I played this game, I was probably 12 years old, so you have to imagine what this did to me. And the sequel was probably even more interesting because in 2001, one of the main plot points of Metal Gear Solid 2 was about this artificial intelligence that would capture all data on internet, analyze it, and filter it for the purpose of information control and population control, ultimately. And I find this very interesting to think about these things in 2001 because, as we know, in 2013, pretty much this thing happened, and Edward Snowden leaked US intelligence documents describing, a very similar system. So now you're thinking, hey, in 2001, that was a very, very interesting discussion to have about, data integrity, net neutrality, privacy in general, and influence of medias in general. And I thought, hey, this is genius. This is the kind of games I want to make. I want to make games that have a purpose. I want to make games that influence people. And so that's sort of why I still make games today. But I was still burnt out during the time I was having these reflections, and I needed to do something about it. So I quit my job in Sweden. I went traveling for a while again. I find that traveling is something that is important for me to get back on track. This is me in Japan somewhere, climbing a volcano. And at the end of all of this, I ended up in Frankfurt, Germany, with a new opportunity this time and a refreshed mind. And I started working at Crytek. So I guess you might have heard of this as well. So yeah, this was a new adventure. This was a way for me to start again, start from scratch. I was offered another very similar position on the Sandbox, which is their editor and their, game engine pipeline. And so I specialized again, 3 times without really choosing it. So maybe this will show you how much your first assignment will be important for your career. But I don't mind specializing again. In fact, I still like doing game engines. And I like it even more because this game engine is a product. This game engine is something that we sell. And because we sell it, I don't have the constraints of being part of a game and having to ship a game as opposed to making a good solution. In this case, I can interact with many different games. The games that we're making in-house, the games that some other people are making with the engines, maybe some of the games that you may make with this engine. And I also get to interact with the community, so I get to give back to the people. And I think for me that's really a refreshing take on games development. So yeah, I wanted to show you something about the CryEngine.
achieved with CryEngine.
Yeah, all right. So that was the trailer that they showed at GDC this year, and it's a lot of games from the different projects that are being made with CryEngine. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Right. So that's more or less the end of my personal story. You know, this is what I'm doing today, and maybe this is where I will get to interact with you. But the Lisboa Games Week guys also asked me to, you know, give you trends and insights or something, my vision for the future of games. And there I thought, you know, looking up numbers and giving you, I don't know, market studies or something like this. But really, I'm not the best person for this. I wanted to tell you about what I really believe in, and what I really believe is the future. And my belief is that, you know, the games industry is sort of a very, very young industry. We are pretty much in the beginning, and maybe we will look back at what we're doing today the same way we're looking back at mute films and black and white films, you know. Maybe this is just the beginning. So what can we do next, you know? I think there's a lot more to explore. There are new genres, and of course we're seeing a lot of new genres pop up in the independent scene, but I'm sure there are a lot of new things that we can do. There are also new devices, new platforms, and maybe this was started by all the motion sensor craze, and you know, later on the cameras, the Kinect. Today we have the VR over there. We also have augmented reality games. We have so many different things that are happening that really you shouldn't limit yourself thinking about just a console or a PC. Also, there are new ways to tell stories. If you've recognized the screenshot, you probably know what I'm talking about. This is from the Stanley Parable, which is a very interesting way to tell a story, and something that, you know, was never really seen before. Also, I would like to see games being recognized as an art form. I think so far people are reducing this to entertainment, and it doesn't really have to be. We know that a lot of games are trying to emulate movies, and it's very, very true. If you're in the industry, you'll realize that a lot of people are trying to make a movie. And in the same way, I think movies were trying to make books for a long time. Movies have been getting inspiration from books, and we are getting inspiration from movies. But I think games are so much more. You know, again, if you think about movies, there are things that you can do in a movie that you could not do in a book, because suddenly you have imagery. And there are a lot of things you can do in games that you cannot do in a movie. So it's okay to be a movie, but it's okay to think of it as something else. So if I wanted to make art, you know, games as art, then I want to like strip out everything I know about games. And if I do that, you know, what do we have left? I think games, in their purest sense, are just an interactive experience. Actually, I put audiovisual there, but that's almost too limiting. We could imagine that other senses are involved in the future. And if you build that, if you build your design from there, if you forget everything you know about games and build from scratch, then maybe you can use the medium to its fullest potential, and I really hope that you do. We're also a growing industry. I'm probably not teaching you anything here. Budgets are through the roof. GTA 5 had above $250 million, and you know, reached an ever-growing audience. The sales are also through the roof. Again, to get back to GTA, they made $1 billion in a few days. So we're getting to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, entertainment industry in the world. And we have an opportunity to reach more people, more cultures, more genders, you know, than ever before. So if you have $250 million, well, first of all, contact me. But you know, I hope you have something to say, because that would be a really big waste to spend $250 million on a game that doesn't say anything. And if you don't have $250 million, you know, don't forget that it's never been easier to make games. Today we have game engines that are super accessible. You can get, you know, with a very fair business model for independent or solo developers. We have communities of independent developers that are already there, that are ready to help you. And you know, funding is also a solved problem. I won't go into detail, but you can get funding from crowdsourcing to angel investors and everything in between. You won't be a pioneer anymore, but you will be standing on the shoulders of giants, and you can go further than they have been. The barrier of entry has never been lower. So you know, don't be intimidated. You can make games. And maybe if we think of the things that I talked about before, maybe you can make this difference today, because the opportunity, I think, is there to break this cycle. So let me ask you this question again. Do you want to make games? Is it still yes? I don't know, maybe. If it is, then focus on getting your first experience. I think even if you want to go indie, it's important to have something on your resume to show for and to show some credibility there. Get your foot in the door, and if the opportunity calls for you abroad, then be ready to go there, be ready to be mobile. Start networking, you're not alone. Join online communities, join Polycount, join Gamma Sutra, join AI game dev if you're a programmer. You know, there are so many things. Join your favorite game engines community and participate. Go to conferences and show your portfolio. Have something to show. That's probably the most important thing in this whole presentation. And yeah, don't wait. Make games today. If you wait, then somebody else will do that for you. And I think if you really want to make games, then follow your dreams. And if you really want to, you can change the world. Thank you. Okay, I guess we have time for a few questions, even though we started a bit late. So, if anybody wants. No? All right. I'll be around anyway if you want to talk to me. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the conference.
Pessoal, não precisam de ser tímidos, podem, se não querem fazer